You won't believe how right resolve could change your life. All phenomena, the Buddha once said, are rooted in desire. Everything we think, say, or do, every experience comes from desire. Even we come from desire. We were reborn into this life because of our desire to be. Consciously or not, our desires keep redefining our sense of who we are. Desire is how we take our place in the causal matrix of space and time. The only thing not rooted in desire is nibbana, because it's the end of all phenomena and lies even beyond the Buddha's use of the word all. But the path that takes you to nibbana is rooted in desire, in skillful desires. The path to liberation pushes the limits of skillful desires to see how far they can go. The notion of a skillful desire may sound strange, but a mature mind intuitively pursues the desires it sees as skillful and drops those it perceives as not. Basic in everyone is the desire for happiness. Every other desire is a strategy for attaining that happiness. You want an iPad, a sexual partner, or an experience of inner peace because you think it will make you happy. Because these secondary desires are strategies, they follow a pattern. They spring from an inchoate feeling of lack and limitation. They employ your powers of perception to identify the cause of the limitation, and they use your powers of creative imagination to conceive a solution to it. But despite their common pattern, desires are not monolithic. Each offers a different perception of what's lacking in life, together with a different picture of what the solution should be. A desire for a sandwich comes from a perception of physical hunger and proposes to solve it with a Swiss on rye. A desire to climb a mountain focuses on a different set of hungers for accomplishment, exhilaration, self-mastery, and appeals to a different image of satisfaction. Whatever the desire, if the solution actually leads to happiness, the desire is skillful. If it doesn't, it's not. However, what seems to be a skillful desire may lead only to a false or transitory happiness not worth the effort entailed. So wisdom starts as a meta-desire, to learn how to recognize skillful and unskillful desires for what they actually are. Unskillful desires can create suffering in a variety of ways. Sometimes they aim at the impossible, not to grow old or die. Sometimes they focus on possibilities that require distasteful means, such as lying or cheating to get ahead in your job. Or the goal, when you get it, may not really keep you happy. Even the summit of Everest can be a disappointment. Even when it's not, you can't stay there forever. When you leave, you're left with nothing but memories, which can shift and fade. If you did mean or hurtful things to get there, their memory can burn away any pleasure that memories of the summit might hold. In addition, desires often pull in opposite directions. Your desire for sex, for instance, can get in the way of your desire for peace. In fact, conflict among desires is what alerts us to how painful desire can be. It's also what has taught each desire how to speak, to persuade, to argue, or bully its way into power. And just because a desire is skillful doesn't mean it's more skillful at arguing its case than the unskillful ones, for those can often be the most intransigent, the most strident, the slickest in having their way. This means that wisdom has to learn how to strategize too, to strengthen skillful desires so that less skillful desires will listen to them. That way, desires can be trained to work together toward greater happiness. This is how a mature and healthy mind works, conducting a dialogue not so much between reason and desire as between responsible desires and irresponsible ones. But even in a mature mind, the dialogue often yields compromises that don't really go to the heart, snatches of sensual pleasure, glimpses of spiritual peace, nothing really satisfying and whole. Some people, growing impatient with compromise, turn a deaf ear to prudent desires and tune into demands for instant gratification, all the sex, power, and money they can grab. But when the rampage of gratification wears itself out, the damage can take lifetimes to repair. Other people try their best to accept the compromise among desires, trying to find a measure of peace in not reaching for what they see as impossible. But this peace, too, depends on a deaf inner ear, denying the underlying truth of all desires, that a life of endless limitations is intolerable. Both sorts of people share a common assumption that true, unlimited happiness lies beyond reach. Their imaginations are so stunted that they can't even conceive of what a true, unlimited happiness in this lifetime would be. What made the Buddha special was that he never lowered his expectations. He imagined the ultimate happiness, one so free from limit and lack that it would leave no need for further desire, and then treasured his desire for that happiness as his highest priority. Bringing all his other desires into dialogue with it, he explored various strategies until finding one that actually attained that unlimited goal. This strategy became his most basic teaching, the Four Noble Truths. Most of us, when looking at the Four Noble Truths, don't realize that they're all about desire. We're taught that the Buddha gave only one role to desire, as the cause of suffering. Because he says to abandon the cause of suffering, it sounds like he's denying any positive role to desire and its constructive companions, creativity, imagination, and hope. This perception, though, misses two important points. The first is that all four truths speak to the basic dynamic of desire on its own terms: perception of lack and limitation, the imagination of a solution, and a strategy for attaining it. The first truth teaches the basic lack and limitation in our lives, the clinging that constitutes suffering, while the second truth points to the types of desires that lead to clinging, desires for sensuality, becoming, and annihilation. The third truth expands our imagination to encompass the possibility that clinging can be totally overcome. The fourth truth, the path to the end of suffering, shows how to strategize so as to overcome clinging by abandoning its cause. The second point that's often missed is that the Noble Truths give two roles to desire, depending on whether it's skillful or not. Unskillful desire is the cause of suffering. Skillful desire forms part of the path to its cessation. Skillful desire undercuts unskillful desire not by repressing it, but by producing greater and greater levels of satisfaction and well-being so that unskillful desire has no place to stand. This strategy of skillful desire is explicit in the path factor of right effort. What is right effort? There is the case where a monk, here meaning any meditator, generates desire, endeavors, arouses persistence, upholds and exerts his intent for the sake of the non-arising of evil, unskillful mental qualities that have not yet arisen, for the sake of the abandoning of evil, unskillful qualities that have arisen, for the sake of the arising of skillful qualities that have not yet arisen, for the maintenance, non-confusion, increase, plenitude, development, and culmination of skillful qualities that have arisen. This is called right effort, DN 22. As this formula shows, the crucial elements for replacing unskillful mental qualities with skillful ones are desire, persistence, and intent. Desire gives the initial impetus and focus for right effort, while persistence provides staying power. Intent is the most complex factor of the three. The Pali word here, citta, also means mind, and in this context it means giving your whole mind to the work at hand. All your powers of sensitivity, intelligence, discernment, and ingenuity. You don't want your mind to be split on this issue. You want all of its powers working together on the same side. These three qualities, desire, persistence, and intent, underlie every attempt to master a skill. So it's useful, in undertaking the path, to reflect on how you've used these qualities to master skills in the past. The Buddha, made this point in his many similes comparing the person on the path to a master craftsman, a musician, carpenter, surgeon, acrobat, cook. As with any skill, there are many steps to developing the path, but 4 stand out. The first is to use your ingenuity to fight off the chorus of inner voices trying to dissuade you from making the effort to be skillful in the first place. These voices are like devious lawyers representing strongly entrenched interests, all your threatened unskillful desires. You have to be quick and alert in countering their arguments because they can come from all sides, sounding honest and wise even though they're not. Here are some of the arguments these voices may propose, along with a few effective responses. Trying to manipulate your desires like this is unnatural. Actually, you're already manipulating your desires all the time when you choose one desire over another, so you might as well learn to do it skillfully. And there are plenty of people out there only too happy to manipulate your desires for you. Think of all the advertisements clamoring for your attention. So it's better to put the manipulation in more trustworthy hands, your own. Trying to change your desires is an attack on your very self. This argument works only if you give your sense of self, which is really just a grab bag of desires, more solidity than it deserves. You can turn the argument on its head by noting that since yourself is a perpetually changing lineup of strategies for happiness, you might as well try changing it in a direction more likely to achieve true happiness. To think of skillful and unskillful desires is dualistic and judgmental. You don't want non-dualistic mechanics working on your car or non-dualistic surgeons operating on your brain. You want people who can tell what's skillful from what's not. If you really value your happiness, you'll demand the same discernment in the person most responsible for it, yourself. It's too goal-oriented. Just accept things as they are in the present. Every desire tells you that things in the present are limited and lacking. You either accept the desire or accept the lack. To accept both at once is to deny that either has any real truth. To try to dwell peacefully in the tension between the two, in a path of no craving to be rid of either, is what the Buddha called limited equanimity, and what one Thai forest master called the equanimity of a cow. It's a futile attempt to resist such a divine and mysterious power. Desire seems overwhelming and mysterious simply because we don't know our minds. And where would we be if we kept slapping the term divine or cosmic on forces we didn't understand? Arguing with unskillful desires is too much work. Consider the alternative: an endless wandering from one set of limitations to another, continually seeking happiness, and yet finding it always slipping from your grasp, repeatedly taking a stance for one desire one moment and shifting to another desire the next. Right effort at least gives you one steady place to stand. It's not adding a more demanding desire to the chaotic mix. It's offering a way to sort out the mess. And the Buddha's path holds open the hope of an unlimited happiness, preceded by increasingly refined and reliable levels of happiness all along the path. In short, his alternative is actually the one that, in the long run, is more enjoyable and involves less work. Once you've silenced these voices, the next step is to take responsibility for your actions and their consequences. This requires being willing to learn from your mistakes. Several years ago, a sociologist studied students in a neurosurgery program to see what qualities separated those who succeeded from those who failed. He found ultimately that 2 questions in his interviews pointed to the crucial difference. He would ask the students, "Do you ever make mistakes? If so, what is the worst mistake you've ever made?" Those who failed the program would inevitably answer that they rarely made mistakes or else would blame their mistakes on factors beyond their control. Those who succeeded in the program not only admitted to many mistakes but also volunteered information on what they would do not to repeat those mistakes in the future. The Buddha encouraged this same mature attitude in his first instructions to his son, Rahula. He told Rahula to focus on his intentions before acting and on the results of his actions both while he was doing them and after they were done. If Rahula saw that his intentions would lead to harm for himself or others, he shouldn't act on them. If he saw that his thoughts, words, or deeds actually produced harm, he should stop them and resolve never to repeat them without at the same time falling into remorse. If, on the other hand, he saw no harmful consequences from his actions, he should take joy in his progress on the path and use that joy to nourish his continued practice. Although the Buddha aimed these instructions at a 7-year-old child, the pattern they outline informs every level of the practice. The whole path to awakening consists of sticking to the desire always to do the most skillful thing. It develops as your sense of skillful gets more refined. If you act on an unskillful desire, then take responsibility for the consequences, using them to educate that desire as to where it went wrong. Although desires can be remarkably stubborn, they share a common goal, happiness, and this can form the common ground for an effective dialogue. If a desire doesn't really produce happiness, it contradicts its reason for being. The best way to make this point is to keep tracing the thread from the desire to its resulting actions, and from the actions to their consequences. If the desire aimed at a happiness that caused suffering to others, notice how their corresponding desire for happiness leads them to undermine the happiness you sought. If the desire aimed at a happiness based on things that can age, grow ill, die, or leave you, notice how that fact sets you up for a fall. Then notice how the distress that comes from acting on this sort of desire is universal. It's not just you. Everyone who has acted, is acting, or will act on that desire has suffered in the past, is suffering right now, and will suffer in the future. There's no way around it. Reflecting this way helps to weaken the "why me" tendency that aggravates suffering and makes you cling fiercely to the desire causing it. It also helps develop two important attitudes that strengthen skillful desires: a sense of dismay, samvega, over the universality of suffering, and an attitude of heedfulness, appamada, to avoid being duped by that particular type of desire again. Unskillful desires don't really give way, though, until you can show that other, less troublesome desires actually can produce greater happiness. This is why the Buddha emphasizes learning how to appreciate the rewards of a virtuous, generous life, the joy in fostering the happiness of others, the solid dignity and self-worth in doing the hard but the right thing. It's also why his path centers on states of blissful, refreshing concentration. Accessing this refreshment in your meditation gives you immediate, visceral proof that the Buddha was no killjoy. The desires he recommends really do produce a happiness that can give you the strength to keep on choosing the skillful path. That's the next step, patiently and persistently sticking with the desire to do the skillful thing in all situations. This isn't a matter of sheer effort. As any good sports coach will tell you, hours of practice don't necessarily guarantee results. You have to combine your persistence with intent, sensitivity, discernment, ingenuity. Keep an eye out for how to do things more efficiently. Try to see patterns in what you do. At the same time, introduce play and variety into your practice so that the plateaus don't get boring and the downs don't get you down. The Buddha makes similar points in his meditation instructions. Once you've mastered a state of concentration, see where it still contains elements of stress. Then look for patterns to that stress. What are you doing to cause it? Find ways to gladden the mind when it's down, to liberate it from its confinements, to steady it when it gets restless. In this way, as you learn to enjoy rising to the challenges of meditation, you also gain familiarity with subtle patterns of cause and effect in the mind. The fourth step, once you've mastered those patterns, is to push their limits. Again, this isn't simply a matter of increased effort. It's more a rekindling of your imagination to explore the unexpected side alleys of cause and effect. A famous cellist once said that his most exhilarating concert was one in which he broke a string on his cello and decided to finish the piece he was playing on the remaining strings, refingering it on the spot. The most obvious strings in meditation are the specific techniques for fostering stillness and insight. But the more interesting ones are the assumptions that underlie the quest for skill: lack, strategy, dialogue, your sense of self. Can you learn to do without them? There comes a point in your meditation when the only way for greater happiness is to begin questioning these assumptions. This leads to some intriguing paradoxes. If desire springs from a sense of lack or limitation, what happens to desire when it produces a happiness with no lack or limitation at all? What's it like not to need desire? What would happen to your inner dialogue, your sense of self? And if desire is how you take your place in space and time, what happens to space and time when desire is absent? The Buddha encouraged these queries by describing the awakened person as so undefined and unlimited that he or she couldn't be located in the present life or be described after this life as existing, not existing, neither or both. This may sound like an abstract and unreachable goal, but the Buddha demonstrated its human face in the example of his person. Having pushed past the limits of cause and effect, he was still able to function admirably within them in this life, happy in even the most difficult circumstances, compassionately teaching people of every sort. And there's his testimony that not only monks and nuns, but also lay people, even children, had developed their skillful desires to the point where they gained a taste of awakening as well. So imagine that, and listen to any desire that would take you in that direction, for that's your path to true happiness. Right resolve. The more skillful you are in your search for happiness, the lighter you tread on this earth, because you realize that happiness, to be true and lasting, has to be harmless, something that doesn't take anything away from anyone else, which means that it has to come from within. So that's what we're doing as we meditate. We're looking for a harmless happiness. This is a very important way of being kind to others. Sometimes meditation is denounced as a selfish activity because you seem to be just looking after yourself. But people who know how to look after themselves are less of a burden on other people. That's why these skills are an expression of kindness. There's a passage where the Buddha says that right resolve, which is one of the factors of the path, finds its highest expression in doing right concentration. In other words, you have to reflect on the fact that your quest for happiness is going to have to depend on your own actions, and you don't want to harm anybody else in the course of the quest. Because your actions come from your resolves, you have to reflect on which resolves might be harmful. Some of them involve wanting to commit outright violence to other people, or having ill will for other people. Some of them involve being attached to sensual desires, because, as the Buddha once said, even if it rained gold coins, we wouldn't have enough for our sensual desires. If that's where we're looking for happiness, there's no end to it. And how many showers of gold coins have you seen? And how many showers would we need to satisfy every person, every animal on earth? With no sense of satisfaction, we're bound to get into conflict with one another over what few gold coins there are. There's no way that a true happiness can be found that way. So you try to learn how to wean yourself away from sensual desires. And the best way to do that is to find a sense of pleasure within. This is why the Buddha taught right concentration. It's not just that you focus on your mind, but you focus in a way that gives rise to a sense of ease, a sense of rapture. In this way, you satisfy your immediate need for pleasure at the same time that you're developing clarity in the mind. When our pleasure depends on harming other beings, we tend to have big blind spots around the harm we're doing. We can think of all sorts of ways to justify the harm we cause to other beings or to other people in the course of our quest for pleasure. In doing so, we built up huge areas of denial and ignorance in our mind. But when your pleasure depends on things that are causing no harm at all, you can be clearer about where there is harm in the world, where there is conflict, because your happiness doesn't depend on that harm or conflict. So, what you've got here is a happiness that's blameless and also very clear, the ideal happiness to form part of the path. So focus on the breath in a way that feels comfortable. Focusing on the breath is called directed thought. Learning how to make it comfortable is called evaluation. These are the two factors that help build concentration. The third factor is singleness, that you really focus on the breath and try to stay with the breath and nothing else. These are the three things you focus on developing. Notice how the breath feels in the different parts of the body. Here, we're not talking just about the air coming in and out of the lungs, but also about the whole energy flow, the subtle movement of the body. As the breath comes in, the breath goes out. Try to notice. Do you tense up as you breathe in? Do you hold on to tension as you breathe out? Can you breathe in a way that doesn't build up tension? Can you breathe out in a way that's not holding on to tension? First, you want to start out at one spot in the body where it's easy to get a sense of the breath coming in, the breath going out, or the movement of the body as you breathe in, as you breathe out. Learn how to relate to that spot so that you stay with it but are not clenching up around it, so that there's a sense of openness and fullness right there in that spot. Fullness in the sense that the blood is allowed to flow naturally without being squeezed and diverted. This is a skill. For most of us, when we concentrate on some part of the body, we tense it up in order to maintain a sensation we can stick with. But here, you want to maintain a sense of openness and stick with that. Learn how to stick with that sense, so that you can keep that sense of openness and fullness all the way through the in-breath, all the way through the out. When you can maintain that, move to other parts of the body. You can do this systematically. You might start, say, at the navel, or the base of the throat, or the back of the neck. If you start at the navel, go up the front of the body, then down the back, out the legs. Then from the back of the neck, down the shoulders, and out the arms. Or if you start at the back of the neck, you can go down the back first, out the legs, down the shoulders and out the arms, and then down the front of the torso, taking the body section by section to see if there's any section where you tend to hold on to tension with the out breath or the in breath, and training yourself to breathe in such a way that there's no holding on, so that things are allowed to flow smoothly. The breath flows smoothly, the blood flows smoothly, and there's a sense of ease all the way through the breathing process. Some people at this point begin to get a sense of floating, but try not to drift out. You can float and be buoyant, but stay in place. There's a sense of lightness and buoyancy, so keep that sense of lightness, but stay where you are. You've learned to breathe in such a way that the whole body feels at ease throughout the in-breath and out-breath. Try to maintain that sense of awareness of the whole body and let the pleasure radiate out through the body. Just learn how to maintain that, to stick with it. If you find yourself losing focus when you open up your range of awareness to the whole body, go back to surveying the body spot by spot, section by section, and then try settling down with the whole body again. You may find yourself going back and forth like this for a while until you feel comfortable and stable staying with the whole body. Even though there's a sense of ease and lightness, there's also a solidity to your focus. In other words, it's steady. It doesn't get moved around easily. At this point, you want to maintain a sense of being focused primarily on one spot in the body, but aware of the whole body. It's like looking at a painting. Your eyes may focus on one spot in the painting, but you can see the whole painting, even though you're focused on one spot. And here you have it. Right resolve, the intention to stick with the meditation. You're not harming anyone. You feel no ill will for anyone. You don't need to think about sensual pleasures. This is the embodiment of right resolve. And this sense of ease and happiness forms the path. It's your nourishment on the path. In the text, they talk about the different aspects of the path being like different aspects of a fortress. Mindfulness is like the gatekeeper. Wisdom is like the smooth walls that nobody can climb up to cause danger. And right concentration is like the food you have stored away to keep yourself nourished. This way, as you develop skill in your pursuit of happiness, you find that you need fewer things outside. There's less need to compete with others over things outside. Your hungers and addictions lose a lot of their force and their sharpness because you've got a good alternative source of pleasure right here. This is how we tread lightly on the earth. We're finding our happiness inside and a sense of buoyancy and ease inside. So we have less and less need for pleasures outside. So take the time and energy needed to develop this skill because it will serve you well throughout life. The desire for things to be different. You're going to be sitting here with your eyes closed for an hour, so try to make it a pleasant experience. Take a couple of good, long, deep, in and out breaths and ask yourself, where in that process of breathing is the potential for ease, pleasure, a sense of fullness in the body? If there doesn't seem to be much pleasure just yet, focus on the parts that are okay. But don't think that they'll have to stay just okay. Learn how to develop the potentials you have here, because the breath does have a lot of potentials. You'll find that the use of your perceptions will make a big difference. How you visualize the breath to yourself, how you pay attention to the different parts of the body, how you react to the parts of the body where there are patterns of tension. Can you focus on them in a way that begins to disperse the tension? Can you spread your awareness around so that it envelops the body and dissolves away any bits of tension here and there that otherwise would stay there because you're not aware of them or you're not paying attention to them? Ajahn Lee talks about the breath being the medium by which the medicine of alertness and mindfulness can make a difference in how you're feeling your body right now. That's one of the big lessons in concentration practice, one of the most important lessons, that you can change things. Think of how Ajahn Lee discovered this method. He'd gone into the forest, walked with another monk for 3 days to a very out-of-the-way place. They were going to spend the rains retreat there, depending on a hill tribe village for alms. Well, a few days after they arrived, Ajahn Lee had a heart attack. As he later said, he was ready to die if he had to, but he wanted a sign. Was there a possibility that he might survive? And there were a couple of signs that indicated that, yes, he could. So he set about to see what he had to work with. He didn't have much. The diet there, from the point of view of Thai medicine, was really bad for the heart. A lot of bamboo shoots. In Thai medicine, heart attacks are basically considered a disease of the wind element, and bamboo shoots are bad for the wind element. So his food wasn't going to be his salvation. He realized he would have to work on the wind element from within. Now, he'd already seen some yogis in India, noticing how they use the breath element in their bodies to stand in single positions for long periods of time out under the sun. He had learned a little bit about that. Now he was going to explore it even further. That's how he pulled himself together. He looked at the potentials he had, saw what he could do with them, and as a result, at the end of the rains retreat, he was able to walk out, 3 days to get back to civilization. He lived for another 8 years. So he didn't just say, "Oh, this is what a heart attack is like. It's like this." He didn't tell himself that the desire for things to be different was bad. He wanted to explore, what are the potentials here, to see how far they could go. This is why we have method 2 in keeping the breath in mind. It's also why we have that passage where he talks about how, when you're working on concentration, you're taking what's inconstant and trying to make it constant. You're taking what's stressful and trying to make it easeful. and you take what's not under your control and see how far you can control it. You push against those three perceptions, and in doing so, you create a path. This is how the path works in general. You don't start with equanimity. You start with the principle of action, that your actions can make a difference. Back in medieval India, when they introduced the Four Noble Truths in the basic textbooks for Buddhist doctrine, they would start with the 5 aggregates, move quickly to the 3 characteristics, and then get to the 4 Noble Truths. In other words, they started with a picture of reality. Reality is composed of aggregates, and the aggregates are marked by the 3 characteristics. The message of that picture was that reality is pretty much out of your control. It's not worth your while trying to exert control over it. That attitude has permeated a lot of Buddhist practice ever since. But when the Buddha introduced the 4 Noble Truths, he didn't start with a principle of reality. In fact, there are passages in the canon that make fun of teachers who, when you ask them a question about what's worth doing in life, will start with how many elements there are in the world, or whether good and bad are just social conventions, or the idea that actions are unreal. In other words, they start with a picture of reality, and then from that picture of reality, all too often the message is that human action is totally powerless. The Buddha, though, started with the power of human action. His graduated discourse, his introduction to the 4 Noble Truths, starts not with principles of reality, but with truths about actions. He talks about generosity, he talks about virtue, and the good that can come from doing these things. How you can make your life a better life when you practice these things. Of course, he's going to get to the point where the goodness of just virtue and generosity has its limitations, but even then, he doesn't tell you to just give up on action. When he then teaches the 4 Noble Truths, the most important part of the 4 Noble Truths is the path, a path of action that will lead to the end of action. But it is a path of action. It's instructions on how you make things better, how you take that desire for things to be different and you don't snuff it out. You train it. You realize that simply wishing for things to be different is not going to get you there, but it can motivate you to do the things that will get you there. One of the definitions of suffering is not getting what you want. In other words, being born and not wanting to die. You can't get that simply by wishing. But there is a path, the path of virtue, the path of concentration, the path of discernment that will get you where you want to go. It'll take you to a different place from where you are right now, a place where there is no death because there is no birth. What's important is that you can make a difference, and you shouldn't try to deny your desire to make a difference or for things to be different. Instead, simply learn how to train that desire. After all, that kind of desire is one of the bases of success. It's part of right effort, and with each of the skills you learn on the path, you find that you really can make a difference. Now again, you do run into limitations. A John Lee couldn't make himself live forever. During his 8 remaining years, he had heart trouble again and again. For a few years, he was able to pull himself together. There came a point, though, when he couldn't. But by then, he had other things that were more important that he could do. Which means when you start thinking about equanimity, remember the Buddha's pattern for teaching equanimity. You don't just go straight to equanimity. Think of those different lists that talk about developing equanimity. You develop equanimity through insight. You develop equanimity through concentration. You develop equanimity as part of the Brahmaviharas. Equanimity comes after you've made a difference in your mind, after you've found a sense of well-being, the potential for well-being in each of those activities. The equanimity of insight comes after the joy of insight. You gain insight to things that have been burdening the mind, and you realize that you don't have to carry those burdens. There's a joy that comes with that. The equanimity of concentration. First, you go through the first, second, and third jhanas: rapture, pleasure, more pleasure. Pleasure gets more and more refined. Only then do you settle into the equanimity of the fourth jhana. And then the Brahmaviharas. You start with a sense of well-being that comes from goodwill, compassion, empathetic joy, when you realize that you don't mean ill to anyone at all. Your heart is wide. You have compassion for all beings, including those who have harmed you. You have empathetic joy for others with no sense of narrow resentment. The heart finds joy as it gets more and more expansive. Then you develop equanimity because, after all, no matter how much you wish for all beings to be happy, it's not going to happen. Not everyone wants to do the work involved in being truly happy. There does come a point where you have to say, that's as far as I can go in that direction. But you've already gone pretty far. The same with the practice of concentration. You stop the directed thought and evaluation when you realize that no matter how much more you talk to yourself about the breath, it's not going to get any better. It's good enough as it is, so you settle in. Then you find that the rapture that comes from settling in like that becomes oppressive. It's too strong. You want something that's better, something more refined. So you drop the rapture. You get the mind to the point where there's just pleasure in the body, equanimity in the mind. Then you find that even the need to breathe in and breathe out feels oppressive. Your sensitivities have been heightened at that point, so you allow the body just to be there. Because your awareness fills the body, breath energy fills the body, and the mind is very still. The body doesn't need to breathe, and you don't have to force it. So you come to equanimity with a sense of fullness. If you go straight to equanimity before you've done anything, it becomes defeatist. Equanimity has to follow on joy for it to be the large-hearted equanimity that's a good part of the path. But then you see that it, too, has its limitations. This has been the pattern all along. You saw the limitations of generosity and virtue. Now you begin to see the limitations of concentration. But if things stopped there, it would be like the serenity prayer. May I have the courage to change what I can change, the patience to accept what I can't, and the wisdom to tell the difference. But there's more. When you take the powers of discernment you've developed as you've been getting the mind to settle down and you've gained an understanding of the mind, its tendency to run off to hindrances and how you can put a stop to that tendency, and then all the processes that go into creating this state of concentration, developing the potentials you have in the breath, in the body, in the mind, in your perceptions, then you begin to see, oh, this too is fabricated. This too has its limitations. Is there something better? And the Buddha's answer is yes. And you find that opportunity within yourself. That's when you realize that the practice is not just a matter of running up to limitations and accepting them. You've seen where the limitations are everywhere else in the world, and that funnels your interest into the deathless, because prior to that, the mind seems to want to do anything else. Go anywhere else, but to the deathless. So you've got to show it that there are going to be limitations no matter where you go. Even the good things you do with generosity, virtue, concentration, and discernment have their limitations. Maybe it's time that you open up to the possibility of something better. That's why the Buddha is steering you in this direction. You learn to accept those limitations because you're going to go to some place that's unlimited. That's the message from the beginning, all the way through to the end. The power of your actions, the power of human action based on that desire for things to be different. You don't snuff out the desire. You don't deny it. You learn how to make it skillful. You learn how to focus it on skillful actions, and you pursue the different skills of generosity, virtue, concentration, and discernment to see how far they can take you. As in that image of the relay chariots, the first one can't take you all the way, but it can deliver you to the next one, which can take you further to the next one, which can deliver you to the next one, which can take you even further. You don't stop with equanimity because you see that it too is fabricated and there must be something better. You finally reach the chariot that takes you to where you want to go, a place with no limitations at all. It's the end of desire. It's the end of wanting things to be different, not because you've told yourself that it's a bad desire, but because you've gotten to a place that's totally satisfactory and couldn't be improved if it were different. I saw recently someone quoting Ajahn Mahabhuwa saying that Nibbana is a place of enough. Their idea was that teaching people to have a sense of enough would take them to Nibbana right now. That's got things backwards. When you get to Nibbana, then things are enough because they really are enough, because you've made a difference. You've seen how far desire can take you. It can deliver you to the threshold of where you want to go. So don't look down on desire. That was another one of Ajahn Lee's lessons. It's because of our desire to practice, our desire for true happiness, that we're going to be able to find it. Just take that desire seriously. It's going to require skill, many skills, but they're skills that we can all develop by nurturing the potentials we already have.